Identity politics within LGBTQ arts festivals in Ireland. Okay, so a brief description. So LGBTQ arts festivals are shown to be predominantly engaging with older audiences. This has been explored by Binney and Kless with regard to the Gays LGBT Film Festival. Remarks are made from festival organisers that their audience is predominantly over 45 and young LGBT people do not go to LGBT arts events. Roisin Geraghty, programmer of Gays, reiterates this point regarding the age range of their attendees. 11% of their audience fell into the 18 to 24 age bracket. She also remarked that the program of the festival is catered in part to their already established older audience. Ruth McCarthy of the Queer Arts Festival and Brian Merriman of the Gay Theatre Festival also expressed difficulties in engaging younger audiences. Numerous reasons were given for this, including cost, location, and more interested in LGBT content online. With this in mind, I wanted to explore this age group further, their attitudes towards community representation online, and if that contrasts to their perceived community representations within these festivals. So the term emerging adults will be used to describe this age group. Arnott describes this demographic as a transitionary and explorative life period distinct from adolescents and established adults. It is thought of as being more significant to current generations as opposed to previous ones. It can be characterized in numerous ways, including instability, feeling in between, and identity exploration. Indeed, LGBTQ emerging adults can also be seen in the same way. Culturally and socially distinct from LGBTQ adults. Identity exploration can also be seen as part of this life period, resulting in their different attitudes towards identity categories and terminology. Terms like non-binary, fluid, and queer are more popular with younger generations. This is highlighted in a YouGov survey conducted in 2015 where, when asked to define their sexuality, 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds placed themselves in the non-binary area as neither 100% gay or straight. The survey also highlighted that non-binary responses progressively decreased as those surveyed got older. So this led me on to an exploration of how this demographic felt about the representation of the LGBTQ community. So, media representation of the community has rapidly increased in the last number of decades. Media representation is very important as it is the primary site for production of knowledge on these identities. It is particularly relevant to younger people. Many LGBTQ media characters are their first exposure to the community, and they act as important guides into the LGBTQ world. However, numerous factors can impact on this representation. In a study on perspectives of LGBTQ emerging adults on LGBTQ media representation, many young people felt that traditional media offered limited representations, due in part to being controlled by middle-aged men, middle-class men, being financially motivated and appealing to a mainstream audience. As such, the representations of the community were quite limited to familiar tropes. Contrastingly, online representations were less financially motivated, were more controlled by younger people, offered more opportunities for interaction and discussion, and as such, representations were much more varied. My research will build on this by seeing if different programming styles associated with LGBTQ arts festivals also offer a similar representational perspective amongst this age group. Similarly to media representation, LGBTQ arts festivals have increased and evolved over the last number of decades. This has been attributed to numerous factors, including progression with LGBTQ rights, an increase in assimilation into mainstream culture, and identity categories being constantly revised and contested. This evolution can be seen in a very basic way within some of the festival's names. Many festivals begin as gay and move to LGBT and then move to queer. Because of this evolution, different styles regarding programming and representation have emerged. So there are traditional styles of programming which offer familiar, limited, and positive representations of the community. There is a lack of intercultural representation. They dismiss anything radical or transgressive. They can be financially motivated and they can appeal to a mainstream audience. Contrastingly, non-traditional styles aim to be countercultural and engaged in activism that deviate from the norm. They offer more opportunities for discussion regarding identity, and they facilitate intercultural dialogues which can appeal to other minorities. Some festivals indeed try to use both styles in order to appeal to a wide audience. This research will analyze which programming style appeals to a emerging adult audience. So qualitative interviews will be used to explore this somewhat complicated issue. However, another research method was also deemed necessary for this subject matter. An online survey was necessary in order to ask people demographic and somewhat sensitive details, including sexuality and gender identity. This message was deemed necessary in order to access people who may not want to reveal this information face to face. The survey will be followed up with a semi-structured qualitative interview. This seems to be a popular research method with other articles exploring Irish LGBTQ youth. Questions asked will be opinion-based and not personal. An example will be, do you think the names of the festivals directly illustrate their representational agendas? Other methods were also considered, however, they had considerable ethical implications. So the ethical considerations were significant during this research. This was predominantly due to figuring out the most appropriate way to ask someone to define their sexuality and gender identity. It required a lot of discussion with my supervisor with regard to why this question was important and what would be the best way to obtain the data. The question was important to me in order to see if the cohort were defining themselves in more complex ways. Also, it was to emphasize that the LGBTQ community should not be seen as one homogeneous group, as different subsections of the community may have representational issues that are specific to them. Other research methods included only online methods, but this was deemed limiting in terms of exploring this complicated issue. Focus groups, however, revealing identity terms and the likelihood of participants knowing each other was high and may have impacted on the responses, and one-on-one interviews. But similarly, revealing identity terms, even in a one-on-one situation, may have also had a negative effect on the interviewees. As such, all of these methods were deemed unsuitable. So, data. So the interviewees will be selected from the survey respondents. They will be grouped together in terms of identity and location. They will be selected to represent geographic diversity and selected to represent as many identity categories as possible. Thematic analysis will be used to analyze the data to explore similarities and differences, and also to allow for unexpected responses. Expected data will be that this cohort will believe that artists should be chosen not only to represent gender and sexual diversity, but also other identity categories, race, etc., or class, etc., as much as possible. The decision should be in response to the limited representations of LGBTQ life in traditional mainstream media. The representations in programs should act as a platform for discussion on different identity issues relevant to LGBTQ youth. This expected data is partially based on the Queeriosity Festival, which targets under 25-year-olds, giving them an opportunity to engage with arts and culture whilst also making sense of their own identity. So the project, the critical evaluation. So my project plan and progress. So although a plan was drafted, it has not been a linear route. At this point, extensive literature has been reviewed, background research interviews with festival directors and programmers have been conducted, and the promotional material for the research has been drafted. However, the project plan has changed repeatedly due to a revised ethical approval submissions and potentially unnecessary research paths. Therefore, time scope available to recruit and interview the participants, which will be conducted in the coming weeks, is now more limited than originally expected. The sample size will also be 6 to 8 interviewees. So the strengths of the research is that it is socially relevant, it is giving a voice to a minority, it's also historically relevant as these festivals have a history of constantly evolving in terms of their aims and their audiences, and multiple primary and secondary sources have been used to explain this complicated issue. The limitations are that it is impossible to represent all identities within the LGBTQ community. Findings therefore cannot be generalized, and data collection will be time consuming and more complicated to analyze. So slide 10, yep. Yeah, so the data, the data will contribute to each of the festival's future strategic plans to engage this demographic. It contributes to research regarding the evolving nature of LGBTQ arts festivals in terms of audience and representation. It also contributes to research regarding the evolving nature of sexuality and gender identity. Many further areas of research have arisen from this project, potential further research areas, including the rise of LGBTQ content in a non-LGBTQ arts festival. So this increase has resulted in conflicting views amongst festival programmers. They feel that it is positive for the LGBTQ community in terms of visibility, but limiting for the LGBTQ arts festivals in terms of the content that is available to them. It was brought up by Roshan Garrity in an interview regarding gays, and it has been explored further in Schoonover and Galt. Another potential future research path would be to see if queer arts festivals are offensive for older LGBTQ people. There has been a reluctance of festival directors to change their name to queer as it may be deemed offensive to older audiences who hear it as a term of homophobic abuse. There is also a reluctance to adopt a non-traditional style of programming as it may move away from more historical awareness of the LGBTQ movement. This has been brought up by Brian Merriman in an interview regarding the Gay Theatre Festival and explored further by Danans in his investigation of identity politics at the European Film Festival, LGBT Film Festival. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.